The human stepped into our war council chamber with mud still clinging to her boots. And I swear by the 7 moons of Arcturus, half the assembled admirals nearly choked on their ceremonial breathing apparatus. Here we were, the finest military minds in the galaxy, draped in our pristine command regalia. And this creature looked like she'd crawled through a waste disposal unit. Captain Mira Volkov, that's what her identification chip read, though her pronunciation made it sound like some guttural bark. The way she mangled our elegant high galactic tongue should have been criminal. Every syllable dripped with that harsh, primitive accent that marked her as undeniably embarrassingly human. Admiral Kexton of the 6th Fleet, a being whose tactical brilliance had crushed 17 rebellions, actually snickered behind his ceremonial mask. The sound rippled through our ranks like wildfire. Even I, Tactical Coordinator Velnara of the Hegemony Intelligence Corps, felt my chromatophores flush with second-hand embarrassment for this representative of humanity's so-called military. "Apologies for delay," she said, butchering our pronunciation so thoroughly that 3 translators actually winced. Transport had mechanical issues. As if the fate of 3 star systems hung in the balance, and she was discussing her personal inconvenience. Fleet Commander Zixara, our supreme military authority, gestured with barely concealed disdain toward the tactical display. The holographic battlefield showed our predicament in painful detail. The Sithari Death Fleet, 47 vessels strong, had blockaded the trade nexus at Kepler Station. 3 million civilians trapped. Our combined armada of 200 ships couldn't break their formation without catastrophic losses. Human representative Zixara's voice carried that particular tone reserved for addressing lower species. "Your people requested inclusion in this council. Perhaps you could contribute something useful to our strategic discussion." The human's response was to pull out what appeared to be a primitive data pad, its surface scratched and dented like some ancient relic. Several admirals exchanged glances that clearly said, "This is what passes for technology among primitives." "Before we begin," Volkov said, her accent making every word sound like grinding metal, "I need clarification on your current tactical assessment." Admiral Thurgon of the 2nd Battle Group actually laughed, a harsh, chirping sound that echoed through the chamber. "Our assessment, child? We have been waging interstellar warfare since your species was discovering fire. The Sithari have positioned themselves in a nexus formation, impenetrable defense grid, overlapping shields, concentrated firepower. Any frontal assault would be suicide." "Suicide, yes," she agreed, and something in her tone made my sensory tendrils twitch with unease. "For conventional tactics." The way she emphasized conventional sent a chill through my exoskeleton. There was something lurking beneath that crude exterior, something that made my tactical analysis algorithms start running emergency calculations. Fleet Commander Zaya leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the hollow display. "Enlighten us, human. What profound wisdom does your infant civilization offer?" Volkov studied the tactical display for exactly 37 seconds. I counted. Her eyes, those strange predatory orbs that marked humans as persistence hunters, tracked across the formation patterns with unsettling focus. "Your intelligence reports," she said finally, "indicate the Sithari admiral commanding this blockade is someone named Vector, the Merciless." "Correct," I replied, accessing my data banks. "Vector has never lost a defensive engagement. His nickname stems from his tendency to execute prisoners as psychological warfare, completely ruthless, utterly predictable in his brutal efficiency." "Predictable," she repeated, and something that might have been a smile played across her features. Humans, I'd learned, showed aggression through facial expressions, a deeply disturbing trait. "That's interesting." Admiral Kexton's patience evaporated. "Interesting. 3 million civilians will die if we don't break this blockade within 6 rotations. The Sithari aren't known for their hospitality toward prisoners." 6 rotations, Volkov mused, making notes on her primitive device. "More than enough time." "Enough time for what?" Zexara demanded. The human looked up from her calculations, and for the first time since entering our chamber, she spoke in perfect, flawless high Galactic. Not a trace of accent. Not a single mispronounced syllable. Enough time to make Vexar do something spectacularly stupid. The silence that followed could have powered a battleship. Every being in that chamber, creatures who had conquered star systems, who had commanded fleets numbering in the thousands, stared at this mud-covered human with dawning realization. She had been performed. The entire crude, primitive act had been deliberate misdirection. "You speak our language perfectly," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I speak 47 languages perfectly," she replied, still in that flawless high Galactic, including 3 different Sithari dialects. Amazing what you can learn when people assume you are too stupid to understand their conversations. Fleet Commander Zixara's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. "How long have you been performing this deception?" "Since I arrived in System 3 days ago. Your security briefings were quite informative, especially the parts where you discussed humanity's primitive strategic limitations and our laughably simplistic military doctrine." Her smile widened, showing those predatory teeth. "I particularly enjoyed Admiral Thagon's assessment that humans are barely capable of coordinating multi-ship formations." Thagon's chromatophores flashed emergency colors. "You were listening to classified strategic discussions. I was standing right there. You just assumed I couldn't understand. Classic mistake. Underestimating your opponent because of surface appearances." She gestured toward her mud-stained uniform. "This, for instance, standard Earth Marine field gear, designed for extended operations in hostile environments. The mud isn't carelessness. It's camouflage pattern from Kepler Station's outer hull maintenance tunnels." My tactical analysis centers went into overdrive. "You have been conducting reconnaissance inside the blockade zone for 3 days. Amazing how invisible a primitive maintenance worker becomes when everyone assumes you are too stupid to be a threat." She activated her datapad, and suddenly our holographic display showed detailed internal schematics of Sithari ship configurations, Vextar's flagship, the Endless Rage, crew complement, weapon systems, shield generators, life support distribution, even the Admiral's personal quarters. The display updated with more intelligence, patrol routes, communication frequencies, shift rotations, supply line schedule, information that would have taken our best intelligence operatives weeks to gather. Admiral Kexton's breathing apparatus made a whistling sound of amazement. "This level of detail, how did you penetrate their security?" "By being exactly what they expected to see. Humans are supposedly inferior, right? Perfect cover for intelligence gathering." Her expression turned calculating. "Now, about breaking this blockade. Your conventional analysis is correct. Frontal assault would be catastrophic. But you are thinking like civilized beings. And you are thinking like what?" Zixara asked, though something in his tone suggested he already feared the answer. "Like a human." She manipulated the display, highlighting specific points in the Sithari formation. "You see an impregnable defensive position. I see a target-rich environment, with 47 ways to create cascading system failures." The tactical display shifted, showing movement patterns and probability matrices that made my analytical processors actually ache. Whatever this human was planning, it operated on principles that violated standard military doctrine in 17 different ways. "Your plan?" I asked, though part of me desperately didn't want to know. "Simple. We are going to make Vector believe he's facing exactly the kind of straightforward, primitive assault he expects from humans. And while he's busy positioning his forces to repel our laughably simplistic attack," she paused, her predatory smile widening, "we are going to introduce him to the concept of asymmetric warfare." Fleet Commander Zaxara leaned back in his command throne. "Explain." "Gladly. But first, I need to know, how attached are you to conventional rules of engagement?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Around the chamber, our finest military minds exchanged glances of growing unease. Whatever humanity's representative was about to propose, it clearly existed outside the boundaries of civilized warfare. The Sithari have taken civilians hostage, Admiral Thargon said slowly. Standard protocols may not apply. Perfect. Volkov's smile now showed entirely too many teeth, because what I'm about to suggest would probably get me court-martialed in peacetime. She activated a series of tactical overlays that made the display look less like a battle plan and more like a demolition blueprint. Every major system in the Sithari formation was highlighted with probability cascades for catastrophic failure. Step 1, she began. We broadcast a challenge to Vector using traditional human military doctrine. Big, obvious fleet movements. Textbook formation patterns. Everything your intelligence reports say we are capable of. That would be suicide, I protested. It would be performance. While Vector is positioning his forces to counter our primitive tactics, a small infiltration team, disguised as maintenance drones, will be installing some very special modifications to his ship systems. What kind of modification? Zexara asked, though his tone suggested he already regretted the question. The kind that turn a flagship's reactor core into a very large, very localized star. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of our life support systems. Even our breathing apparatus seemed to whisper condemnation. Admiral Kexon finally found his voice. You are talking about turning his own ship into a weapon against his fleet. I'm talking about giving Vector the Merciless exactly what he deserves. Her voice carried a cold certainty that made my chromatophores flush with instinctive fear response. The Sithari used terror as a weapon. Let's show them what real terror looks like. She manipulated the display again, showing cascade patterns of destruction that would ripple through the entire enemy formation. Ship after ship would suffer catastrophic failures as their admiral's flagship became a miniature supernova in their midst. The civilian casualties, Thargon began, will be minimal if we execute this correctly. The blast pattern will be directed away from Kepler Station. The Sithari fleet, however, she shrugged with unsettling casualness, will cease to exist in approximately 14 minutes after initiation. Fleet Commander Zixera studied the projections with the careful attention of a being who had seen too many battles. The infiltration team would need to be aboard the enemy flagship when the reactor overloads. Correct. They would have no chance of escape. Also correct. You are volunteering for a suicide mission. For the first time since revealing her deception, Captain Mira Volkov's expression softened slightly. I'm volunteering to save 3 million civilians. The math is pretty simple from where I'm standing. The silence stretched like a taut cable ready to snap. Here was this human, this supposedly primitive representative of an inferior species, calmly proposing to sacrifice herself to achieve what our combined fleets couldn't accomplish through conventional warfare. There has to be another way, I found myself saying. There's always another way, she agreed, but not one that guarantees civilian survival. Not one that ends this threat permanently. And certainly not one that teaches the Sithari that taking hostages is a losing proposition. She stood, her primitive uniform still mud-stained, her equipment still crude by our standards, but something fundamental had shifted in how we perceived her. This wasn't the bumbling representative of a backward species. This was something far more dangerous. This was a human being who had decided that a problem needed solving. I need 48 hours to prepare, she said, switching back to that harsh accent. The performance was resuming, and I will need your finest engineers to help modify some specialized equipment. What kind of equipment? Zixera asked. Her predatory smile returned. The kind that doesn't officially exist in your military inventory. As she turned to leave, Admiral Thargon called out, Captain Volkov, why the deception? Why pretend to be something you are not? She paused at the chamber entrance, looking back over her shoulder. Because sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy never sees coming. And right now, Vector the Merciless is about to learn why humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving us alone with our tactical displays and our dawning realization that we had just witnessed something unprecedented. A human had just turned our military council into her personal recruitment center for what amounted to an impossible suicide mission. And somehow, we were all already calculating how to make it work. Deep down, in the parts of our minds that still remembered what it felt like to be prey species, we recognized what we had just encountered. A predator. And predators, we were beginning to understand, played by entirely different rules. 46 hours later, I found myself questioning every tactical decision I'd ever made in 3 centuries of military service. Captain Volkov had transformed our most secure engineering bay into something that looked like a madman's laboratory crossed with a demolition expert's fever dream. "Is that supposed to be glowing that color?" Admiral Kexthan asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, as he stared at the device occupying our central workstation. "Only if we want it to work," Volkov replied, still maintaining that crude accent, despite the fact that we all knew better now. Her deception had become somehow more unsettling after the revelation. Every mispronounced word felt deliberate. Calculate. Human engineering principle number 1. If it's not slightly terrifying, you are not pushing hard enough. The device in question defied classification in our military databases. Part reactor, destabilizer, part quantum cascade amplifier, part what appeared to be salvaged components from a food synthesizer. Only a human would look at our most advanced technology and decide it needed improvement through creative application of kitchen equipment. "Explain to me again," Fleet Commander Zalixara said, his mandibles clicking nervously, "why this contraption requires organic neural tissue to function." Volkov paused in her adjustments, looking up with that predatory smile. "Because synthetic processors follow logical parameters. This device operates on principles that are fundamentally illogical. It needs an organic brain capable of making intuitive leaps that violate standard physics." "You mean it needs someone crazy enough to make it work?" I translated. "Exactly." She returned to her modifications with disturbing enthusiasm. "The Sithari build their technology around predictable energy signatures. This little beauty operates on quantum uncertainty principles. Their sensors literally cannot track something that refuses to behave according to standard physical laws." Engineer Telvara, our finest technical specialist, studied the readings with growing horror. "Captain, the energy fluctuations from this device are completely unstable. One miscalculation and it could vaporize half the fleet." "Only half?" Volkov seemed genuinely disappointed. "I was aiming for at least 60% theoretical destruction radius. Guess I need to recalibrate the containment matrix." The casual way she discussed annihilating our combined armada made my chromatophores flash emergency warnings. This human treated catastrophic destruction the way most species discussed weather patterns. "Perhaps," Admiral Theragon suggested with admirable restraint, "we could review the actual mission parameters once more." Volkov activated the tactical display, showing real-time intelligence from the Sithari blockade. Phase 1 begins in 2 hours. Our fleets move into standard attack formation, exactly as predicted by their tactical analysis. Big, slow, obvious. Everything screams primitive human strategy. The display showed our forces arranged in what any competent military mind would recognize as a textbook frontal assault. No subtlety, no innovative tactics, just brute force applied in the most predictable manner possible. "Vector will position his forces to counter this approach," she continued. "His flagship will move to coordinate point Alpha 7, putting him in optimal position to direct the slaughter of our laughably inadequate attack. Meanwhile," I said, beginning to understand the horrifying elegance of her plan, "you will be aboard his ship, along with my new favorite kitchen appliance." She patted the glowing device affectionately. "See, while Vector is busy positioning his fleet to massacre our forces, I will be having a very private conversation with his reactor core." Fleet Commander Zygzara studied the tactical projections with the careful attention of someone trying to find flaws in what appeared to be an insane but brilliant strategy. The infiltration phase relies entirely on their continued belief that humans are technologically inferior. Which is why I have spent the last 2 days making sure every maintenance drone, every supply run, every routine communication reinforces that assumption. She pulled up communication logs showing her interactions with Sithari personnel. Amazing how much intelligence you can gather when everyone assumes you are too stupid to be dangerous. The logs were fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. For 2 days, this human had been walking freely through enemy positions, collecting tactical data while every Sithari officer dismissed her as harmless. She'd even had casual conversations with their engineering staff about reactor maintenance procedures. They actually gave you access to their technical specifications? Engineer Telvara asked in amazement. They gave me access to everything. Maintenance schedules, security rotations, even Vectar's personal dietary preferences. Her smile widened. Turns out he's allergic to Terran coffee beans. Useful information for someone planning to spend quality time aboard his flagship. Admiral Kexthan's breathing apparatus made that whistling sound again. You are planning to poison him. I'm planning to use every advantage available. Psychological warfare is still warfare. She manipulated the display to show internal ship schematics. The beautiful thing about Vectar's reputation for mercilessness is that it makes him predictable. He will want to personally oversee the destruction of our fleet. That means he will be on the bridge when Phase 2 begins. Phase 2. The moment when her improvised device would turn the enemy flagship into a localized stellar event. With her still aboard. Captain, I found myself saying, there has to be an escape plan, some way to extract you before the reactor cascade begins. There is. Her tone carried finality that made my sensory tendrils recoil. It's called completing the mission. Sometimes the only acceptable casualty rate is whatever it takes to win. The chamber fell silent except for the ominous humming of her device. Here was the fundamental difference between human and galactic military thinking laid bare. We calculated acceptable losses based on strategic value. Humans calculated acceptable losses based on moral imperatives. 1 hour to infiltration, she announced, checking her primitive chronometer. Time for final equipment checks. What followed was the most surreal pre-mission briefing in galactic military history. This mud-covered human in her scratched armor, calmly reviewing procedures for single-handedly destroying the most feared battle fleet in 3-star systems. She discussed reactor destabilization theory with the casual expertise of someone explaining basic mathematics. Remember, she said, addressing our assembled command staff, when the fireworks start, maintain your attack formation until the primary explosion. The blast wave will disable their remaining ships, but you need to be in position to prevent any survivors from reaching the civilian station. What about communication? Fleet Commander Zeke Sarah asked. How will we know when to expect the detonation? Volkov's expression shifted, showing something that might have been regret. You will know. Trust me, you will know. She shouldered her equipment pack, the improvised device secured in what appeared to be a modified containment field. The entire assembly looked like it had been built by someone with intimate knowledge of both advanced physics and creative demolition techniques. Captain Volkov, Admiral Thagon said as she prepared to leave. I owe you an apology. My assessment of human tactical capabilities was incomplete. Your assessment was exactly what it needed to be, she replied, the crude accent slipping for just a moment. Underestimating your enemy is a fatal mistake. Letting your enemy underestimate you is a tactical advantage. As she moved toward the transport bay, I found myself following. Something about this human's casual acceptance of certain death bothered me in ways I couldn't articulate. Why? I asked when we were alone in the corridor. Why sacrifice yourself for civilians you have never met? She paused, considering the question with surprising seriousness. Because someone has to. And because, if we let the Sithari succeed here, they will try it again somewhere else. Better to end this now, permanently. Your species values individual life, I persisted. This contradicts everything we know about human psychology. Does it? She turned to face me fully, dropping the accent entirely. Or does it prove exactly what human psychology is really about? We are not just persistence hunters, Coordinator Velnara. We are pack hunters. And right now, 3 million civilians are part of my pack. The simplicity of it was staggering. This human had expanded her protective instincts to include beings she'd never met, from species she'd barely encountered, simply because they were threatened. The tactical implications were profound and deeply unsettling. Your military analysts got one thing right, she continued. As we reached the transport bay, humans are primitive. We still think like the predators we evolved from. But they missed the most important part, which is, we are persistence hunters. We don't give up. Ever. And when something threatens our pack. Her smile showed those predatory teeth one final time. We don't just fight back. We make sure it never threatens anyone again. The transport shuttle was a modified stealth unit, designed to appear as routine maintenance traffic. She would approach the SCI-FI flagship in the guise of a routine supply run, her false credentials already accepted by their automated systems. 47 minutes until detonation, she said, reviewing her final checklist. Make sure your fleets are in position for cleanup operation. As the shuttle prepared for departure, Admiral Kexton's voice crackled over the communication system. Captain, our tactical projections show a 12% chance of mission success. Your projections are based on conventional analysis, she replied, settling into the pilot's seat. Good thing I don't do conventional. The shuttle launched with barely a whisper, its stealth systems rendering it invisible to our own sensors within seconds. On our tactical display, a single marker showed its progress toward the SCI-FI blockade. Fleet commanders, Sixara's voice echoed through the command center. Begin attack sequence. Make it look convincing. What followed was the most elaborate performance in military history. Our combined fleets moved into assault formation with deliberate clumsiness, their movements exactly matching the tactical predictions SCI-FI intelligence would have developed about human capabilities. Every maneuver screamed amateur hour, primitive strategic thinking applied by an inferior species. And it worked perfectly. SCI-FI forces are repositioning, I reported, watching the enemy formation shift in response to our apparent incompetence. The IVTAR's flagship is moving to coordinate point Alpha 7, exactly as predicted. Contact with infiltration team? Vera asked. Negative. Communication blackout is part of the operational plan. We were flying blind, trusting everything to a human's promise that we would know when the destruction began. The next 30 minutes felt like geological epochs. Then it happened. The SCI-FI flagship simply ceased. One moment it was the centerpiece of an impregnable defensive formation. The next it was an expanding sphere of superheated plasma that lit up our sensors like a miniature star. The explosion propagated through their formation in precisely the cascade pattern Volkov had predicted, ship after ship suffering catastrophic system failures as the blast wave overwhelmed their shields. By the 7 moons, Admiral Theragon whispered. She actually did it. In 14 minutes and 37 seconds, the most feared battle fleet in 3-star systems had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris and escaping life pods. The blockade was broken. The civilians were safe, and galactic military doctrine had been fundamentally rewritten by a human with mud on her boots and a device built from kitchen equipment. All fleets, Fleet Commander Zaxara ordered, begin rescue operations for surviving SCI-FI personnel, and someone send a message to Kepler Station. They are free to resume normal operations. As our ships moved to secure the area, I found myself staring at the expanding debris field that had once been the enemy flagship. Somewhere in that radioactive cloud were the remains of Captain Mira Volkov, the human who had just proved that individual heroism could reshape the strategic balance of power. Coordinator Velnara, Zaxara's voice, interrupted my thought. Prepare a full tactical analysis of this engagement for Fleet Command. They need to understand what we just witnessed. What exactly did we witness, sir? The Fleet Commander was quiet for a long moment, studying the aftermath of humanity's introduction to galactic warfare. We witnessed the moment everything changed. The moment we learned that humans don't just fight wars, they end them. 3 days later, As I compiled my report, I realized that Captain Volkov had accomplished something beyond the tactical victory. She had forced every military mind in the galaxy to reconsider fundamental assumptions about warfare, sacrifice, and the mathematics of acceptable loss. The Sithari survivors, when interviewed, spoke of their encounter with something beyond their understanding. They described a human who walked among them unnoticed, who spoke their language better than they did, who understood their psychology well enough to predict their responses with terrifying accuracy. But more than that, they spoke of someone who had turned their greatest strength, their reputation for merciless efficiency, into the weapon that destroyed them. Vectar's predictability had become his fatal weakness, exploited by a species he had dismissed as primitively straightforward. The final entry in my report read, "Tactical recommendation: humanity should be reclassified from minor military power to extinction-level threat, not because of their technology or their numbers, but because of their willingness to sacrifice everything for principles that transcend individual survival. They do not simply fight wars, they eliminate threats permanently, regardless of personal cost." Further recommendation: under no circumstances should any galactic power attempt to use civilian populations as leverage against human forces. Such actions will result in responses that violate all conventional understanding of proportional military escalation. As I sealed the report for transmission to Fleet Command, I couldn't shake the memory of Captain Mira Volkov's final words. Humans were persistence hunters who never gave up, and when something threatened their pack, they didn't just fight back. They made sure it never threatened anyone again. The galaxy had just learned what that meant. And somehow, I suspected we were all safer for it. Even if the thought of humanity's protective instincts kept me awake for weeks afterward. But the story doesn't end there. Oh no! The universe has a twisted sense of humor when it comes to human ingenuity. 6 months after the Kepler station incident, as it came to be known in our classified files, I received a priority communication that made my chromatophores flash every warning color in my species repertoire. The message header read, "Urgent, human military liaison request." I nearly deleted it automatically. After Volkov's sacrifice, humanity had been granted full membership in the Galactic Defense Coalition, but their representatives had been refreshingly quiet. We'd assumed they were taking time to integrate into proper military protocols. We assumed wrong. The communication originated from Earth's newly established Strategic Operations Command, and the sender's name made me question whether the universe was actively trying to drive me insane. Captain Jake Morrison. Another supposedly primitive representative of humanity's developing military doctrine. Coordinator Velnara, the message began in perfect high Galactic. "We need to discuss the Omega Centauri situation. Urgently. Omega Centauri, the star cluster where the Vorthak Empire had been conducting what they euphemistically called population management operations on 12 inhabited worlds. 60 billion civilians under the boot of the galaxy's most efficient totalitarian regime. Every major military power had written off those worlds as unrecoverable, without triggering a sector-wide war that would make the Sithari blockade look like a training exercise. I scheduled the meeting for the following day, expecting another mud-covered human with delusions of tactical genius. What arrived at my office was something far more disturbing. Captain Morrison looked like he'd stepped off a recruitment poster. Pristine uniform, polished insignia, regulation haircut. He moved with the precise efficiency of someone trained in proper military protocol. Everything about him screamed civilized officer in a way that made my sensory tendrils twitch with unease. "Coordinator," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with unsettling casualness. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I understand you worked closely with Captain Volkov during the Kepler operation." "I did. I studied this new human carefully, looking for signs of the deception that had made Volkov so effective. Her sacrifice saved 3 million lives. Her sacrifice proved a point," Morrison corrected, his tone carrying implications that made my analytical processes start running threat assessments. "The question is, what do we do with that proof?" He activated a portable holo display that showed the Omega Centauri cluster in painful detail. 12 worlds under Vorthak occupation, their populations enslaved, their resources being systematically stripped for the Empire's war machine. The Vorthak believe they are untouchable, Morrison continued. Their military doctrine is based on overwhelming force applied through conventional strategic principles. Very civilized, very predictable. There it was, that word again, predictable. The same word Volkov had used right before turning the galaxy's understanding of warfare inside out. Captain, I said carefully, the Vorthak Empire commands over 3,000 warships. Their territory spans 47 star systems. Any military action against them would require a coalition force that doesn't exist. Would require a coalition force using conventional tactics. He agreed. Good thing we don't do conventional. He manipulated the display, showing detailed intelligence on Vorthak fleet positions, supply lines, command structures, information that should have been impossible for humanity to possess. How did you acquire this data? I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. We asked nicely. His smile carried the same predatory quality I remembered from Volkov. Amazing how cooperative people become when they think you are too primitive to be dangerous. The intelligence was staggering in its scope and detail. Troop movements, resource allocation, even personal psychological profiles of key Vorthak commanders. Someone had been conducting the most comprehensive espionage operation in galactic history, and no one had noticed. This represents months of intelligence gathering, I said, studying the data streams. How many operatives does humanity have in Vorthak territory? Officially? None. Morrison's expression became calculating. Unofficial. Let's just say, human tourists are very enthusiastic about cultural exchange programs. Cultural exchange programs. Tourists. He was telling me that humanity had infiltrated the Vorthak Empire using vacation travel as cover. The implications were staggering and deeply, profoundly disturbing. What exactly are you proposing, Captain? Operation Clean Slate. The display shifted to show tactical projections that made Volkov's reactor sabotage look like amateur hour. Complete liberation of all 12 occupied worlds, permanent neutralization of Vorthak military capability, minimal coalition casualties, and maximum Vorthak casualties, I assume. Actually, no. His answer surprised me. Maximum Vorthak chaos. There's a difference. He explained the plan with the same casual confidence Volkov had shown. But where her strategy had been brutally direct, Morrison's approach was elegantly complex. Instead of destroying the Vorthak Empire, humanity intended to make it destroy itself. Phase 1 involves simultaneous infrastructure failures across all occupied worlds, he said, highlighting key installations, power grids, communication networks, transportation systems. Nothing permanent, just enough disruption to create confusion. Phase 2. Psychological warfare on a scale never attempted before. We are going to convince every Vorthak commander that every other Vorthak commander is planning a coup. The tactical display showed communication intercepts, falsified intelligence reports, manufactured evidence of conspiracies that didn't exist. Humanity had spent months creating an intricate web of paranoia and suspicion within the Vorthak command structure. You are planning to trigger a civil war, I realized. We are planning to trigger 12 simultaneous civil wars, plus a military revolution, plus a civilian uprising, plus economic collapse. Morrison's smile widened, all coordinated to begin at exactly the same time. And the coalition forces will arrive just in time to provide humanitarian aid to the liberated populations and accept the surrender of whatever Vorthak forces survive the chaos. I stared at the projections, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of what this human was proposing. They weren't planning to defeat the Vorthak Empire through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. They were planning to tattoo it to defeat itself. The complexity of this operation is staggering, I said finally. The coordination required, the timing, the psychological manipulation. It's beyond anything in military history. It's beyond anything in civilized military history, Morrison corrected. But humans aren't civilized. We are persistence hunters, who learn to use tools. Over the following weeks, I watched in horrified fascination as Operation Clean Slate unfolded exactly as Morrison had predicted. The Vorthek Empire, which had seemed unshakable just months before, began tearing itself apart from within. It started with small failures, power outages that lasted just long enough to disrupt military communications, transportation delays that left supply convoys stranded in inconvenient locations, computer glitches that corrupted personnel files and created confusion about chain of command. Each incident was minor, explainable, easily dismissed as routine maintenance issues or operator error. But taken together, they created an atmosphere of mounting tension and suspicion. Then came the intelligence leaks, classified documents that suggested General Kicksmore was planning to overthrow Admiral Velthurk. Communication intercepts that implied Admiral Velthurk was secretly negotiating with coalition forces. Financial records that showed Commander Zorgan had been embezzling military resources. None of it was true. All of it was perfectly believable. Within 6 weeks, the Vorthek military was conducting internal investigations, arresting its own officers, and repositioning fleets to counter threats that existed only in their collective paranoia. The iron discipline that had made them so effective began working against them as commanders prioritized loyalty tests over military efficiency. The civilian populations on the occupied worlds watched their oppressors descend into chaos and drew their own conclusions. Uprisings that should have been impossible began spontaneously, coordinated through communication networks that the Vorthek thought they controlled, but which humanity had been quietly infiltrating for months. Status report, I requested during one of our regular briefings. Ahead of schedule, Morrison replied with disturbing satisfaction. The Vorthek are now committing 60% of their military resources to internal security operations. Their external defense capability has been reduced by 47%, and the civilian population are discovering that their guards are too busy arresting each other to maintain proper surveillance. Amazing how quickly people remember they outnumber their oppressors when the oppressors start fighting among themselves. The final phase began exactly 90 days after the first power outage. 12 simultaneous uprisings on 12 different worlds, supported by Vorthek military units that had decided their commanders were traitors, coordinated by communication systems that humanity had been secretly maintaining throughout the occupation. The coalition fleets that arrived to restore order found themselves accepting the surrender of an empire that had effectively defeated itself. 60 billion civilians were liberated without a single major space battle. The most feared totalitarian regime in the galaxy collapsed, not through military conquest, but through strategic application of its own paranoia against itself. Final casualty report, I asked as we reviewed the operation's aftermath. Coalition forces 0 combat casualties, civilian populations minimal, mostly during the initial uprising phase. Vorthek military, approximately 40,000 casualties, mostly from internal conflicts. 40,000 casualties from an empire of 3 billion beings. It was the most lopsided victory in galactic military history, achieved through methods that didn't officially qualify as warfare by any recognized definition. Captain Morrison, I said as we prepared the final operational report, I have to ask, how many more operations like this is humanity planning? As many as necessary. His answer carried the same quiet certainty I remembered from Volkov. There are 17 other totalitarian regimes currently oppressing civilian populations in coalition space. Each one thinks they are untouchable because of conventional military mathematics. And you intend to prove them wrong. We intend to make them prove themselves wrong. The beauty of this approach is that we don't need to be stronger than our enemies. We just need to be smarter. And humans, Coordinator Velnara, are very good at being smarter than people expect. As I finalized my report to Fleet Command, I realized that the Kepler Station incident hadn't been an isolated example of human tactical thinking. It had been a demonstration of principles that humanity was systematically applying across the galaxy. They weren't just ending individual threats, they were ending the concept of threat itself, by making aggression against civilian populations a guaranteed path to self-destruction. Additional tactical recommendation I added to my previous assessment. Humanity's strategic doctrine represents a fundamental evolution in warfare. They have moved beyond conventional military thinking to what can only be described as psychological architecture. They don't defeat enemies. They convince enemies to defeat themselves. Final recommendation: any species considering hostile action against human-protected populations should be advised that humanity's response will not conform to expected tactical parameters. They will not simply defend, they will restructure entire conflicts to ensure permanent resolution in favor of civilian protection. As I transmitted the report, I couldn't help but wonder what other impossible operations humanity was already planning. Somewhere in the galaxy, another totalitarian regime was probably dismissing humans as primitive, predictable, easily managed. They were about to learn why that was the most dangerous mistake any species could make. Because humans, I was beginning to understand, didn't just protect their pact. They expanded it to include everyone who needed protection. And then they made sure no one could threaten the pack ever again.